Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here?
Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. Our inaugural season, we are breaking down Young Frankenstein. And I'm your host, I'm Alan Sanders.
And I'm your co-host, Walt Murray.
And we are so pleased to welcome back to a graveyard somewhere in the outskirts of Transylvania, our good friend Paul Sullivan from Sully Baseball. Paul, welcome back.
Oh, I'm loving being back, talking Young Frankenstein. What could be better?
I'm glad, because yesterday we were a little concerned when you were worrying about working with your secretary and planner to get a couple of extra minutes free that you were able to make room for us. Thanks for penciling us in.
Well, I cleared my schedule, so, what can you do?
Excellent. Well, where we start off in this minute is exactly where we left off last minute. We're seeing the guys watching the two gravediggers as their Dr. Frankenstein and Igor are peering through the bars of the gate. And it will end with them slowly, it looks like and this is the appropriate use of cart versus wagon, Walt.
That's
They're
right.
taking a cart out of the graveyard with what looks to be a coffin on top.
I actually had that in my minutes just for you.
Thank you. See, Paul, apparently back a while ago, we were talking about the hay cart that was going to take the good doctor from the train station and met the beautiful Inga in the back. We were informed that 4 wheels means wagon, 2 wheels means cart, and I kept calling it a cart, so...
Well, I now, let me write this down. 4 wheels means what?
Wagon.
Wagon.
Whereas 2 is a cart. I kept calling it a hay cart. And it's like, technically you need 4 wheels for a wagon. That's what it had. So anyway.
Well, I think even if the podcast ended right now, we'd be okay. We've already learned something. I now know more than I did when this podcast began. So
there you go.
Well, we're here to educate.
Is that one of our things we're trying to do?
I don't know. I don't even know why we're here.
Educate's a strong word.
Mesmerize.
No, we're
underwhelm.
We're going to give you all that useless crap you use at trivia night that doesn't actually do anything else in your life.
So at least we're accomplishing something.
Right. All right, so as the grave diggers leave the scene, we very quickly see our two heroes in this case, Dr. Frankenstein and Igor, go racing over to the mound of dirt. Well, I want to point out something here that we didn't mention a whole lot last minute, but I love the music in the scene. It's a screech almost of the violin, just almost keeping the tension. You hear the little pluck of the bass as they make their way. And the framing and the style and then that music, I'm back to saying what I did before. It's like we're in a Scooby-Doo minute all of a sudden.
Yeah, and it has that tension somewhere between the monster movie horror film feel and again that kind of Scooby-Doo cartoon adventure kind of sense.
I'm going to go I'll go a different route here with what some of the music was reminding me of. Part of it was reminding me of Citizen Kane. There's some beautiful moments in Bernard Herrmann's score of Citizen Kane where they're going through the gates and the grounds of Xanadu at the beginning, and there's that low boom, 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 boom music that's going on there that provides the mood, and some of it's very mysterious. It's the build up to the line Rosebud. And it's funny that this scene reminded me of Citizen Kane, that the music sounded kind of similar. And that sort of creepy, we're in the dark, black and white, and we're not quite sure what we're dealing with right now. So you go Scooby-Doo, I'll go Citizen Kane. And that's what, if a clip can remind two people of two things as disparate as that's a quality film we're talking.
Well, it really shows you the maturity level of Alan.
Thank you. Well, I was actually going to say, between Citizen Kane and Scooby-Doo, I guess Young Frankenstein falls directly in between.
Dead center.
Split the difference, you get young Frankenstein.
we get young Frankenstein. It's not quite as good as Citizen Kane, but it's not quite as stupid as Scooby-Doo.
That was exactly what they were shooting for.
No, but it is. It's all the artistry of Citizen Kane with the stupidity of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Now, and here's another reason why I kind of thought of Scooby-Doo. Now, I don't know about you, Paul, but we are a dog rescue kind of household. We currently have 6 dogs in our house. We can't say no, so we have to be very, very cautious whenever we go by one of those, setups at the grocery store. Hey, adopt a dog, because we'll come home with our 7th. When I watch these 2 guys digging, when they go running to the grave, Dr. Frankenstein is trying to toss the dirt off of the pile. But if you look at Igor, he's whipping it straight up in the air, and it's landing basically in beautiful arcs right on his back and right on the pile. It's like, it reminds me of my dogs trying to dig in the backyard.
Well, I'll tell you something. This is one of the things that makes this film so brilliant. And that is, we've now gone about, when that happens, that's around nearly second 20. And yeah, it's right around 20 seconds into the clip. So that means we've gone about a minute and 20 seconds without a joke in this film, which you think would be a sin in a nonstop comedy. But one of the reasons why it doesn't feel that is there are little details that are just kind of goofy, that just add atmosphere to silliness here. And the way that he shovels cracks me up because it's not helping. It's just dirt being thrown in the air. And they have to dig deep, and we get determined the next shot how deep they have to dig. And digging like that's not going to help at all. That'll actually probably make it worse.
No, and we kind of have another minute or another, instance where Igor really isn't helping that much. He's supposed to be the helper. But I also kind of cracked up about the way he ran when they walked into the cemetery there. Frederick, yes, exactly. Frederick walks straight to the grave, and Igor is running a serpentine pattern behind him.
And I think this about Marty Feldman, because I don't know that anybody could have controlled him on the set anyway, but he is so in character nonstop. We've said this before, Walt. I sometimes have to go back and rewatch the minute that I'm supposed to be paying attention to everything else because I keep watching, what is Marty doing?
I do the same thing. I keep getting drawn to his antics.
One of the things that makes this film work is that Mel Brooks has filled the cast, not just obviously Gene Wilder and Peter Boyle and Terry Garr and all the people who are up front, but even in some of the smaller roles, like we found out with Monty Landis in the minute we did yesterday, was that he brings in people that he knows, okay, here's someone who's really funny, I can trust him in this. And if there's anything that visually shows what makes this film work is kind of just that moment in a weird way, because he has created something that is visually and cinematically beautiful, and he's allowing these talented people to run around in it. We've got this beautiful shot. Now let's throw Marty Feldman in it, and he'll just sort of run around like a lunatic and start shoveling like he's a dog. And in this shot that is invoking Orson Welles, not just the great Frankenstein films. And to me, that's what makes this film work, is we're going to create something cinematically beautiful and let comedic geniuses run around like a bull in the china shop. And that moment, the fact that we all chuckle at how he runs in and how he starts digging, it works because the shot is beautiful. It works because there's so much care and energy. And when you look at the shot, the very next shot, which is the one which we stick on for the majority of this minute, which is when they pull the coffin out of the ground. You look at that shot, Orson Welles would have been proud of that. You have the lantern that's right in the front in focus. You have the chapel with the crucifix kind of only in a slightly hazed focus. You have the beautiful lighting pulling the coffin out and putting it over to the side. It is, as a cinematic shot, it is exquisite. And what do you put in the middle of that? Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman at the top of their game. And that, to me, this film, I'm a bit of a broken record. Some of you listeners are sick of me talking about this. I'm sorry, this podcast is free. This is, this really drives home, these minutes drive home the care and the love that's behind this film. This is if you put this shot in a Hitchcock film or whatever, it'll fit because it's a beautifully composed, lit and photographed shot. And to use this shot for gag is something that we should all just be thankful that we had someone as smart as Mel Brooks and as caring as Gene Wilder spearheading this film.
I do like the fact that they put that lantern right there in the corner, because if you look at the composition behind it, you've got a dark, almost a portrait effect in the background where everything's been darkened except for the center of the shot. And you're thinking, well, where does the light come from for them coming out of the coffin? Well, there you go. You've got the lantern right there. That's what's providing the illumination for what we need to see.
And Sully, I wish I'd been keeping a running list so far. We're 37 minutes into this film, and this film is a comedy. It's a horror movie. It's now becoming a buddy film as these two kind of bond and have this tension between the two of them. It's a cinematic masterpiece. There are so many things in this movie that it is just so multidimensional that I don't care what kind of film fan you are, you have got something in this movie for you.
Yeah, and there's an element of romance, when saying goodbye to Elizabeth on the train.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Attempted romance.
There we go. I mean, there is some romance later, and then there's some we're not going to talk about what we were doing in the lab. And then we realize later that Madeline Kahn is a truly gifted operatic singer when she sings Sweet Mystery of Life, I'm So Glad I Found You. So, but that comes later. I do want to go back for a minute in the scene with as they're tossing the dirt up. I'm wondering if this is what happens when, because Marty Feldman's eyes kind of go both ways. Maybe he does think he's digging correctly because he's seeing dirt falling on both sides of his head at the same time.
Very well could. He may not be able to see the grave in front of him.
He doesn't even know what he's digging.
What was it Mel Brooks said that the way to hide from Marty Feldman is just press your face right against his nose. He'll never see you.
Yes, he said that multiple times. That's how you hide from him. And what I love about this era, this 70s era, we are not yet in this whole era of the political correctness and whether there's some good and bad to that. These guys could take a joke and they knew how to leverage both their weaknesses and their strengths for their own careers. And Marty Feldman is fantastic in this. He doesn't complain about what happened to him. He doesn't complain about his condition. He's like, you know what? This is who I am. And if I can get people to laugh, that's what I'm going to do. And he never had a problem with it.
Well, I mean, this is also a lot of what makes Mel Brooks is he is pushing that envelope to see how far he can take it. I mean, let's not forget when he did Springtime for Hitler, it's one of the great comedic set pieces in history, but that pan across of the audience watching it in the film, which is one of my favorite visual gags of the world, is just everyone just sort of frozen with their mouth open. That's the way a lot of people saw what he was doing, and so he's always going to be pushing what is the boundaries of taste and acceptability. And some people may think he crosses it, but that's one of the reasons you have Mel Brooks in this world, and I think that he does it with a sense of, the same way that Don Rickles would push the boundaries of what is acceptable to say about people when he would roast people and insult people. That's what Mel Brooks did cinematically.
No, I totally agree. In fact,
it's a cinematic roast.
Yeah, and in that scene you're talking about in the producers, I always in my head envision, based on the theme of that movie, every time we see that pan of the audience, I always envision that's exactly what all of the executives and managers at every studio, when Mel goes into pitch a movie, that's how I imagine what they're doing when he's trying to say, and this is what we're going to do next.
I heard once that someone had asked him when he was trying to pitch the producers as a film, said, "Could you make it Springtime for Mussolini?" And he said, "No, it's not. That's not funny. And if you're asking me to change it to Springtime for Mussolini, then you clearly don't understand this movie." And he's right.
Well, and I think that a lot of my friends, as we were growing up, you either got Mel Brooks or you didn't, and you either got Gene Wilder or you didn't. And I think with a lot of their humor, Young Frankenstein aside, I think with a lot of their humor, you have to kind of look at it and understand the context, but also understand that what's on the surface may not be really what they're going for. And when we talked about, do we do this movie? Do we do Blazing Saddles? in the political environment that we're in right now, it would be really hard to do Blazing Saddles without a disclaimer ahead of every single minute because of the use of one word. And obviously, when you look at the movie, he was not espousing the use of that word. He was poking at the people who do use that word. So it is an interesting thing when you look at these movies and look at Mel's work that not everybody got it. You do have to have a little bit of introspection and a little bit of cultural understanding and a good sense of humor to get him.
And also a sense of not caring. I mean, in a way, Mel knows that not everyone's going to embrace what he does. And, the Pythons had that quality too, that, not everyone's going to love it. So, you're going to have to realize that if you don't care that there's going to be some people who are enraged by what you're doing, but we're still going to do it well, then that's how we're blessed with this. I mean, you couldn't make Airplane today. There's a lot of stuff you couldn't make today. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad, there's some things I'm glad are politically incorrect that we're like, oh, you watch some films, even, from the 80s and 90s, you go like, oh man, I'm glad we don't do that anymore. That's a sign, that's a product of its time. And I wonder, something like Springtime for Hitler was so ahead of its time, was so just such a shovel to the face comedically.
Yes, it was.
And the thing that I really love about Mel and the films that he and Gene did afterwards was they weren't chasing that rabbit. They weren't chasing how could we make something more outrageous than Springtime for Hitler, which may have been, I'm going to say, someone who did something that was of that same level of greatness in terms of being the film of that time. Like what Sacha Baron Cohen did, Borat. I think the films that he made afterwards were trying to almost be more outrageous than Borat instead of being as funny as Borat.
I think that's why they failed, because Borat was really funny, but when you start going so far over the top to almost out-lampoon yourself, it became stupid.
Well, it was for the sake of, it was how far, it was as if they didn't understand what made the first film work. It wasn't just that they did the outrageous things. It was what was behind it, and that there was, oddly, a sincerity to his Borat character that was not in the other characters that he wound up doing. And so the other films just felt like, we're going to shock you, going, nah, that doesn't really, I've seen Two Girls, One Cup. You can't shock me anymore. And so, God bless anyone who understood what I just said. But
yeah, we'll let that just keep rolling on by.
But I actually remember seeing that video, go like, well, I guess I'm not going to be shocked. Everyone wants to shock me. You can't. So you better be funny. And I think that one of the things that he didn't try to, how could I up the ante of Springtime for Hitler? Instead it was, how can I do something else that's really funny, of which you will have scenes like, the farting scenes in, let's forget that was considered to be, outrageous. Everyone farting around the campfire in Blazing Saddles.
But when you see that in the theater and the response from the audience, I mean, I saw Blazing Saddles in the theater last year, and the response in the theater is still just, everybody's side hurts because you're laughing so hard.
By the way, Richard Pryor wrote that scene. You know that? Because Richard Pryor is one of the writers of Blazing Saddles, and that was one of the scenes he wrote, was the farting scene around the campfire.
I'm not surprised.
It's fantastic.
Farting's universal. Farting, the love of farting is primal. So, I mean, it's in Chaucer, for goodness sakes. It's in
Shakespeare.
It's in Shakespeare, yeah. I mean, so there is a prominent scene of farting in the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, and it's wonderful.
Well, I mean, just ask any little kid. Get 4 and 5-year-olds together. Bodily noises are funny, period.
Oh,
little
no
kids, get a bunch of 45-year-old men to start ripping. It's great.
Yeah. When it happens in my office, you can see who the...
What do you think I'm doing right now? I mean,
let it go, boys.
Rip, all right?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's as we move into this scene that we were talking about just a minute ago, where the coffin is slowly being hoisted out of the hole. I've got a question. How did they get underneath it?
Yeah, I wondered the same thing because it doesn't look like they dug around and, they somehow they just got underneath. I have no idea.
So let me look at that again. That you're saying it. I've seen this film 100 times probably, and I've never thought of that. There's.
And it's not till we started doing this minute by minute you start catching a lot of this detail. Yeah. The way it's framed and the angle, it looks like they've got just a hole big enough for the coffin, and yet they're underneath it, hoisting it up from their shoulders.
This may just be one of those kind of suspension of reality moments where you just have to accept that they somehow.
And it must work because every time I've seen this movie, I never thought to question this.
No, I questioned it the first time I went through this minute, and I was like, hey, wait a minute.
Why did they get underneath?
That's odd.
And how deep is that hole?
Yeah, no kidding.
As someone who has directed films and television before, I can tell you that there are sometimes you get such a great shot, and that shot of the coffin coming up from the ground and being placed on its side on top of there is such a beautiful shot. And to be able to have that and to be able to then frame it, it's a beautiful frame where you then have the coffin and you have Gene Wilder and you have Marty Feldman both obviously acting with their eyes like crazy. Especially by the time when the slow burn that Gene Wilder gives to Marty Feldman when it starts to rain. If the one thing keeping that shot from being made is someone questioning the physics of how to push the coffin onto the ground, that is an extraordinarily small price to pay. I'm going to bring up another movie now where the director just said, I don't care if it makes no sense, it's a great shot, we're doing it, is in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I assume you've seen.
Only about 100 times.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I know every frame of it like I know my children, so I assume everyone else does. The scene where you see the mothership behind Devil's Tower rising up makes no physical sense. What was it, buried in the ground?
Right.
Did it swoop down from the sky, hover on the ground behind it, and come up? But the shot is so beautiful, and it immediately creates the scale. With one shot, you see the scale of the mothership, where you're like, oh my God, it's bigger than the mountain. Spielberg has said that he understands that that shot makes no sense. And yet he needed to have that shot in the film.
It's funny because you were bringing up Spielberg with that. I was going to bring up the other time Spielberg made a comment in Raiders of the Lost Ark during the whole Cairo chase scene. One of the continuity people said, wait a minute, this is completely different. it doesn't match. And he said, if the audience is paying attention to the archway and not what's happening, I've already lost them.
Oh, I completely agree with that.
Well,
even as recently as this last summer, I took my kids because they did a re-release of Close Encounters in the theaters for about a week or so. And I took because my kids hadn't seen it yet. I wanted them to see it in the big screen. That's where I wanted to see it for the first time. And they wound up really liking the film. And when you see that shot of the mothership behind Devil's Tower, there is still kind of a murmur. Maybe not a gasp, but certainly a murmur. Like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
It's that sense of awe.
Right. And so it doesn't make any physical sense. So what? This is not a physics lesson.
Well, as a fan, not always understanding the technical work behind stuff like that, I can suspend reality and science for a good sci-fi or action movie. You line them up, all the ones that we've loved over the years. I can suspend reality
if they're done well enough.
The movie, if they're done well and it fits. I have a harder time doing it in a Saving Private Ryan or something like that is more of a historical movie that has to fit. But for something like that, yeah, I can do that and I can buy in. But it is funny that as I watched this minute, I was like, wait a minute, how did they get under there? That doesn't make sense.
Well, certainly it must be pretty gross because one of the first things we see Dr. Frankenstein do is he's got something in his mouth because he has to spit not once but twice, and he's got this look of disgust. And if you pay real close attention, his left hand is out, and he's got something drippy and gooey hanging from his thumb.
Yeah, it is kind of gross, and they don't get into it, but yeah, they definitely set something disgusting there. When he does say, "What a filthy job."
Yeah, I think that one line gives him tons of license for anything. You're like, oh, they must have crawled underneath it and pushed up and were amongst the worms. So that's kind of, It's one of those quick things that gives you license to do whatever you want.
It's definitely sets the tone here that it's Dr. Frankenstein, for a surgeon, for someone who's used to diving into the organs of living human beings and dissecting things. This idea of grave robbing and whatever's underneath that grave, he's a little disgusted by it. You look at his face and he pulls whatever's off of his one thumb and he just kind of throws it down. Yeah. He's like, at least it's not raining.
Right. And then Igor sets the whole tone of it. It could be worse.
Right.
And how could it be worse? It could be raining.
And a great slow burn from once it starts pouring, which of course adds to the beauty of the shot, which is already a beautiful shot. Then you add the rain to it for the atmosphere. And you have two actors just really acting like crazy with their eyes. Obviously, Marty Feldman's always acting with his eyes because his eyes are so bananas. But then the slow burn that Gene Wilder has is hilarious. And you know what the other thing that's really great about this scene where they pull the coffin up and everything is it's one shot. There's no edits. And the slow burn and everything like that would not be as funny if they were cutting back and forth. It allows, sometimes comedy is funnier in a wide shot where you allow your actors to perform, and if you want to look at how one's reacting to the other, you can do it. And again, a lot of times in these classical films of the 30s and 40s, there weren't as many edits, and part of the reason why it was hard to make edits then. You have to physically cut the film and tape it back together. The editing process is a hard process, so you saw these films with incredibly long takes. And that allowed for a lot of playing within the frame. And they used that technique to the advantage because when you have Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman, just keep the camera on. They'll do something funny eventually.
Well, one of the things I've been commenting on throughout is the weird weather in Romania and specifically in Transylvania. I believe outside of our opening credits where you got the sense there was thunder, lightning, and rain, this is the first time we get the dramatic clap of thunder with flash of lightning, and then the rain actually does appear.
On cue.
On cue. The thunder and lightning is always ready to be on cue.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, the environment here is almost an actor because it really shows up when you need it. You had the flash a few minutes ago.
Oh, no, lightning flashes indoors, outdoors, wherever it needs to.
Every time a rat shows up, I mean, it really is perfect and perfectly timed all the time.
What I love about, as we start to close out this minute, that exchange of glances that Paul was just talking about, you've immediately continued to show the relationship between the doctor and Igor, because Igor can't wipe the grin off his face. He thinks this is funny. Look what just happened. I said it couldn't get worse. Well, it could be raining. Look at it's raining.
Got you again.
And he's like, okay, you fooled me with the walk this way. You threw me with your head being on the platter as I was looking for the source of the violin. Now you're throwing me here.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's had it with him.
He is absolutely at the end of his rope.
Well, as we close it out, we do see there's a wipe, and we'll end this minute with just a few seconds of the two of them struggling with the cart, with the coffin loaded on top. It's pouring rain as they exit. I don't know if they're exiting the cemetery or if it's just a weird reverse shot, because if you look at the way it's framed, you see a building in the background, but it doesn't look like the chapel. It looks like a house. So I don't know if we're in a different area or because they pushed the gates in to go into the cemetery. Yeah. So did they reverse this shot somehow, or am I just seeing it wrong?
I think it's the same place. I think it's the same location, just as a reverse shot. This is it's a large budget film, of course, but I don't think that they had the budget to build a new set for every time they wanted to, turn the camera around or something like that. So I think that they probably dressed the shot in a certain way, but I think it's the same place.
All right. Walt, as we close out this minute here, because we can see they're struggling a little bit, it certainly conveys there's a massive weight on this cart, considering it's a wagon cart that's used to carrying hundreds and hundreds of pounds of produce or whatever where you're going. These guys are having a little trouble with the weight of the casket.
Yeah, when you use a weighted cart like that, it can be tricky. They're hard to maneuver. But I'm really looking forward to the next minute because we're headed in a good direction here.
Well, what I like it telegraphing just how big the dude is that they're carrying.
Yes, and we're headed towards a great payoff on that cart, too.
Paul, you have been with us for a couple of minutes now. Before we wrap up minute 37, anything that we skipped over you want to add?
No, I think I've made enough references to Citizen Kane and all the sorts of stuff to make everyone happy today.
And Walt, what about you? Any Scooby-Doo minutes we forgot to comment on?
I think we've covered it.
All right. Well, Paul, if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about you, you've got especially if they're a baseball fan, and we're in the midst, I think by the time this is airing, we're already over a month into regular season play. Where can people learn a little bit more about your podcast?
Well, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Podbean, whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Sully Baseball. That's where I post everything, including around the All-Star Game every year. I do an in memoriam video, kind of like they have at the Oscars. And that's actually, I do it straight. I don't do it snarky or anything. And I put together an in memoriam video. I've been doing it since 2014. I do it every year at the All-Star Game. It's everyone who we've lost since the last All-Star Game. And even though it's not for a few months, I'm already starting to put it together because there are names like Don Baylor and Roy Halladay and Bobby Doerr who are going to be on this one. It's going to be a lot of quivering bottom lips when you see it. And also, I'm the producer of Real Crime Profile, which is, I'm not on, but I'm the producer of it, which is a real crime podcast produced through Wondery, where we have FBI profilers and Scotland Yard profilers talking about cases and shows and, various portions of real crime. And that's an interesting show as well. So that's available via Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and all that as well. So Sully Baseball and Real Crime Profile. But most of all, just follow me on Twitter at Sully Baseball, and all the stuff that I produce and the blog posts I write and everything, they all appear on that too.
Fantastic. Walt, where can people find our much less filled out resume to learn a little bit more about the Wilder Ride?
We are easy to find. We are all over the place. The best place to find us is www.thewilderride.com. You'll get information on the podcast. You'll get links to all the other places you can listen to us. You can find the biographies of all our guests, which are pretty interesting. We have a well-accomplished list of guests here. And if you'd like to help out, if you like what you're hearing and want to be a part of it, you can go to www.patreon.com/thewilderride and find out some ways that you can join our team.
Yeah, we've got some pretty cool levels there that you can show your support for this podcast. You can even work your way up to an associate producer, where we'll make sure we call you out on some of these episodes. And who knows, if you decide we're really worthy, you might actually be one of our next guests on the podcast. So check that out. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. With that said, Paul, you want to still hang out? Maybe come back tomorrow if you can clear out some more room on your schedule?
I have a major dental appointment tomorrow, but let me see if I can turn it around.
Well, I mean, us, dentists, please don't tell us that you're going to choose the dentist over us.
Well, I'll see if I can move this root canal to another time.
Okay.
Well, if you're good and gassed up, it may even be more entertaining.
Well, you guys, please come back tomorrow, hump day. It's halfway through the week, where we'll continue our look at minute 38, where Dr. Frankenstein and Igor continue carting the coffin out, and then they have a bit of an accident with the constable. So we'll have to see how that goes. Until then, Dr. Frankenstein.
Frankenstone. Ovaltine.